The world shrinks to the size of a smartphone that fits comfortably in the palm of the smallest of hands. People are discovering some previously untapped parts of the world and the cultural riches they hold. Now, whereas 1 decade ago, being African was a full pass to being disrespected, we were in the trenches, the stepchildren of continents. No offense to stepchildren. Some of the best-selling contemporary authors of our time are female African authors who are asserting themselves as writers both on the national and international scale. Movies and Netflix series and social media suddenly don't resemble images of Africans that the West is used to seeing. And some of the most popular artistic and music genres are exported from Africa. It truly is a brave new world out there. And flattered as we are by this newfound popularity, we as a continent have seen this play out before. Except the last time we got really popular, it wasn't so much the culture and trends driving the pillaging, but I digress. All that said, I find myself constantly pondering whether the popularity really opened the floodgates to true, authentic Africanism. Is it not true that though our beats are bumping in the clubs and our fashion dominating the catwalks and our dance trends mimicked across countless TikTok accounts, it is still mainly iconic Africans that stand as our most visible continental representations? The gag is, exceptional and rare icons like Nelson Mandela don't quite pave the way for a realistic projection of today's young Africans. We know the world sees us, but do they really see us? Feel free to argue in the comment section. In this video essay, I want to probe into the relationship that women, more specifically African women, have with contemporary media. Are they visible or are they just merely observed? The purpose of this essay, and to a broader extent, this channel, is to look at the degree to which African women have adequate representation and visibility in mainstream and online media. I also want to dissect the lens through which this representation and visibility exists, if at all, and look at whether it adequately represents on a global scale the polyolithic nature of young 21st century African and Afro-diasporic women. Using some primary and secondary research, as well as existing online media publications, specifically those already geared towards promoting various underrepresented groups, I was looking to understand the role that their non-prototypicality and intersectionality across Blackness and womanhood plays towards African women's social invisibility. In summary, I want to get a better understanding of the challenges African women face in terms of representation and visibility in today's contemporary media. As Erin Lewis points out in her 2019 paper titled Black Women's Portrayal in Media and Its Effects on Their Treatment in Society, Black women, specifically in the West where most of the studies I encountered are based, have historically been marginalized by being left out of women's movements due to their Blackness, and then left out of Black rights movements due to their womanhood. These consistent stereotypes of Black female characters in media, when they aren't completely ignored that is, have resulted in a narrow-minded view of who Black women are. These pervasive tropes and this historical sidelining have been observed not only in the way characters are written, but also resulted in the general invisibility or exclusion of Black women. Now at this point, we're still talking about Black women in general, but stay with me. It was only in 2018 that American photographer and living legend Tyler Mitchell became the first Black photographer to shoot a Vogue cover in the magazine's 125-year history. That same year, under the direction of the publication's first Black editor-in-chief, Edward Enninful, British Vogue had the first Black woman on the September cover, the magazine's biggest issue, since its launch in the year 1916. Beyoncé was quoted in her Vogue issue saying, "I was told it was hard for me to get onto covers of magazines because Black people do not sell." And it seems this belief has been held by other gatekeepers over the years. According to a study done by CIROS, an international research center platform, at the time that American actress Kerry Washington, she of Olivia Pope fame, graced the cover of Vanity Fair in 2013, she was the first Black woman on that cover since Beyoncé in 2005. Basically leaving 100 covers between the two of them. Of note is that whether it be magazine covers or popular culture, the standard for the representation of Black people is overwhelmingly African American. In pop culture, Black is often synonymous with African American instead of African. This became a talking point for a hot minute when tennis star Naomi Osaka, whose parents are Haitian and Japanese by the way, was heavily criticized by some African American audiences who said she should have her black card revoked for choosing to represent Japan at the Tokyo Olympics. Now, Osaka responded to the critics saying, African American is not the only black, obviously. This enduring notion, along with other complexities of black identities, means that representation becomes an even more dense undertaking, but one that cannot be abandoned. According to a 2021 study conducted by the Gina Davis Institute on Gender in Media, Black women are now more than ever able to see themselves reflected in mass media. Great. Though hardly at a proportionate rate. Despite popular Black culture, or what is more accurately defined as African American culture, as well as Black women's physical image gaining increased invisibility, it's the narratives of the ordinary Black women on the continent and across the diaspora that often fall between the cracks. We need to ponder the fact that an African American woman is going to experience the world in a very different manner than an African woman. Therefore, my controversial take is that we should look at broadening representation and allowing for the narratives of even more marginalized groups to be represented in contemporary media. As per American psychologist and acclaimed white male Gordon Allport's 1954 theory of contact hypothesis, the promotion and visibility of different groups of Black women could, and I'm paraphrasing here, disrupt the narrative and contribute towards alleviating negative attitudes and or stigmatization towards them. This is certainly something that African women could benefit from, considering the way they're often painted in the mainstream media as either impoverished, uneducated, or uncultivated. There's obviously also a great social benefit to having different people actively engaging and discovering a commonality of perspective. The sharing of content in this manner would be a means of cultural transmission, facilitating even more diverse depictions of Black women from different backgrounds. And that, of course, is the dream. In recent years, we've seen qualities that once brought derision to Black women under a phenomenon summarized by Moya Bailey, she who coined the term misogynoir, now being praised and promoted by mainstream media. Now, physical features are arguably easier to absorb or appropriate, making it simpler to include more images of Black women in media. However, it can be debated that for many reasons, the collective narrative of Black women is harder to promote and commodify. As a consequence, Black women are visible, yet also highly invisible in the media. They are often overexposed around political issues and protesting, yet largely invisible unless it's a conversation about culture and stereotypes. When social psychologist and locked icon Valerie Purdy-Vaughan and Richard Abach wrote about intersectional invisibility in 2008, they defined it as the general failure to fully recognize people with intersecting identities as members of their constituent groups. This hypothesis was an extension of American civil rights advocate and leading scholar of critical race theory, Kimberly Crenshaw's 1989 theory of intersectionality, which loosely posits that people experience life a little differently depending on their overlapping identities. These identities can range from race, class, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, and several other identity markers. Additionally, these lived experiences shape the way people are perceived by others, as well as their own self-perception. Purdy-Vaughan and Eibach developed their model to highlight how people at the point of multiple intersecting identities have even more unique experiences than those with just one or two disadvantaging identities, or what I previously referred to as identity markers. Black women are frequently associated with masculinity and therefore considered to be what Shug calls non-prototypical. They're more likely to go unnoticed and unheard compared to Black men and white women, who are the typical standard in their gendered categories. The way intersectional invisibility plays out has been identified not only in Western regions like North America and Europe, but also in unanticipated places like South Africa. A 2010 paper titled Prototypes of Race and Gender, The Invisibility of Black Women, lent some psychological basis to the theories I've presented above, finding that Black women are more likely than Black men or white women to be misremembered in a memory task, as the non-prototypicality of Black women impedes participants' ability to remember them as distinct individuals. These works resonate with the core of this essay by supporting the theory that Black women end up being most impacted because of their proximity to two marginalized groups, Blackness and womanhood. For the purpose of this video essay, and this video essay alone, because this really isn't a competition, I'm making the suggestion that the group that holds the multiple subordinate identities to a larger degree is Black African women. Existing research tells us that in the global context, Black women hold multiple disadvantaging identities and as a result are more prone to face challenges associated with misrepresentation, disempowerment, and marginalization. It should be noted that even within the context of writing this essay, finding material around intersectionality and the representation of Black women that wasn't focused entirely on African American and Black British women proved quite difficult. Therefore, one could consider the African woman to be the realization of Purdy Vaughan's and Eibach's hypothetical individual. You remember, the one who exists at the knife edge of multiple intersecting identities, destined to be invisible in the global dialogue around representation and empowerment? So I went ahead and I spoke to some Black women, both African and Afro-diasporic. And per my initial research, readings, and dare I say my own experiences of having lived as an African woman across Africa, Asia, and Europe, what appealed most to them in the media they engage with is a focus on simply existing as a Black woman, without playing into the common narratives of poor, struggling Black womanhood. On delving further into the existing representations, very few respondents felt that the stories and narratives they've encountered fully resonated with their own lived experiences and those of other Black women around them. And interestingly enough, some felt that it was the negative narratives around discrimination and prejudices that actually resonated with them, which was something they found incredibly frustrating as they didn't really want that toxicity to be what was always mirrored back at them when they were looking for representation. In 2020, Essence, in partnership with the research firm Added Value Cheskin, conducted a study about the images of Black women in media. Over 1,200 respondents said, "The images we encounter regularly in media are overwhelmingly negative and fall into categories that make us cringe: gold diggers, modern Jezebels, baby mamas, uneducated sisters, ratchet women, angry Black women, mean Black girls, unhealthy Black women, and Black Barbies." The list goes on. The idea of needing to feel represented and feeling a sense of community were also recurring themes. At the end of the day, I want this channel to create visibility and discourage exceptionalism between African and Afro-diasporic women. You know, any attitude towards other countries and cultures based on an idea of being entirely distinct from them, as well as being superior to them in significant ways. I want to uphold the social responsibility of paying tribute to traditions and cultures while acknowledging individuality. I want the space to illuminate the African woman's narrative on her own terms and push back against the single narrative that the continent, along with its most marginalized demographic, is so often forced into. We really need more spaces that showcase the diversity that is Africa, not to make it more palatable before exporting it to Western audiences, but rather in a way that fosters and validates the culture amongst those who share it, while inviting outsiders into the fold to observe the self-representation and solidarity. The question posed at the start of this video essay was around the difference between being seen and being visible when it comes to the relationship that Black women have with contemporary media. I wanted to examine how the limited visibility of Black women further affects the representation of African women in media, and whether that representation adequately portrays their polyolithic nature. What I found was that aside from smaller community-based or niche contemporary spaces that are accessible through the digital sphere, many of those accessible to a larger audience are largely Americanized or, at the very least, have a Western influence and perspective. A lot of the better-known spaces directed at the visibility of Black women are created for consumption by African American or British people of color, largely skewing the language and content in this direction. Even publications or spaces meant to be centered around Africans could be described as having an exploitative angle, as seen in the case of OK Africa, which was originally created by white American women as an avenue for exporting certain aspects of the culture to a distant audience. That said, This doesn't mean these spaces don't serve their purpose across their specific audiences. What is evident is the need for more platforms and spaces representing the demographic that exists at the point of more intersecting identities than those often represented in popular Black media. Those with more disadvantaging identities that put them further down Purdy Vaughan's and Eibach's model of intersectional invisibility. Really, it all boils down to one point. If Black women in the West are as underrepresented and invisible as studies have shown, then it is the African woman who best fits the author and social activist Bell Hooks' description of the invisible woman. Those in the margins, part of the whole but outside the main body, with their own particular way of seeing. There's a need for more spaces that put this woman at the forefront, that give her visibility not only from outsiders but also among her peers, and those who might not even know they share a common culture and experience with her. If the world is really going to see us, it needs to see us, all of us, beyond the dancing charity cases and the weather-beaten matriarchs with a child hanging off each breast. There's a huge difference between being seen and being visible. One is passive, the other active. One keeps you powerless, the other puts you in control. For the first time in a long time, the world is paying attention to Africa, and it's important that we dictate the narrative that will prevail beyond the popularity boom. Thank you for watching.